When an avoidant is crazy about you, their love shows up as mixed signals, not because they don't care, but because they care too much. When an avoidant begins to fall deeper for someone, their emotions don't rise in a straight line. They surge and collapse like waves. One moment, they crave your presence intensely, almost magnetically, and the next, they retreat into themselves as if that same closeness is suffocating. To you, it feels like a confusing, unpredictable cycle. They lean in, make you feel chosen, make you feel special, and then suddenly step back, withdraw, or act distant. But what looks like mixed signals from the outside is actually a battlefield inside them. Their heart wants connection, warmth, and closeness, but their survival instincts, built over years of shielding themselves from emotional vulnerability, warn them that getting too close means losing control, losing independence, or getting hurt. So when they push you away, it's not because you did something wrong. It's not because they've lost interest. It's because the emotions they feel for you are so strong that they trigger the very fears they've spent their entire life trying to outrun. And when they pull you back in, it's because the distance feels even scarier, because the thought of truly losing you sends a shock through their chest. They won't admit to. Their love isn't expressed cleanly or calmly. It comes out in contradictions. Staying up thinking about you but acting cool in the morning. Wanting reassurance but pretending they don't need anything. Missing you but creating space they hope you won't take personally. The push then pull dance is their attempt to manage intensity. They don't know how to regulate. When you get too close emotionally, they push. When the space becomes too quiet, too empty, or too risky of losing you, they pull. They test the connection without meaning to. They try to calm their racing thoughts by controlling the closeness. And sometimes they even hope you'll notice they're conflicted without them having to say it out loud. This cycle doesn't happen because they're unsure of you. It happens because they're overwhelmed by how sure they are. Their attachment to you feels powerful, intoxicating, even destabilizing. And instead of embracing that feeling, they toggle between wanting more and needing to breathe. What's hidden beneath these mixed signals is something most people never see: the intensity of their feelings. The more they care, the more they panic, the more they desire connection, the more they fear being consumed by it. And the more important you become, the more their mind tries to protect them by controlling the interaction. This is why their behavior seems to contradict itself, because their emotions contradict their fears. To love you feels both exhilarating and dangerous. So they dance between closeness and distance, not to confuse you, but to keep their heart from slipping out of the armor they've worn for so long.
If they suddenly go quiet, it isn't disinterest. It's a test to see if you'll abandon them first.
When an avoidant suddenly slips into silence, most people assume it's a sign of fading interest or emotional detachment. But in the avoidant mind, silence is rarely about losing feelings. It's about protecting them. The moment an avoidant starts to genuinely care, their deepest fear awakens. The fear of depending on someone who could later leave, reject, or disappoint them. And instead of openly communicating that fear, they retreat into quietness, not as punishment, not as manipulation, but as a subconscious test, one they don't even realize they're running, to see how you'll respond when their presence becomes fragile. This silent test is born from old wounds and past abandonment. They want to know if your connection is stable, if your intentions are steady, if your care is real, but they don't ask directly because vulnerability feels dangerous. So they create distance and observe. They watch whether you remain calm or become anxious, whether you stay consistent or pull away, whether you give them space or pressure them to respond. Every reaction becomes data, clues about your loyalty, your emotional stability, and your ability to be someone they can risk trusting. The silence they fall into is both a shield and a scanner. It protects them from the vulnerability of expressing how much they feel, and at the same time, it scans for signs of abandonment. They want to know if you care enough to stay present even when they aren't performing, entertaining, or giving you constant reassurance. They want to see if you'll maintain your energy without needing them to constantly prove their interest. And underneath all of this lies a hidden longing for someone who won't run at the first sign of hesitation or fear. Their quietness isn't meant to make you chase them, but it reveals whether you will not in a game-playing sense, but in a do you still choose me when I'm not easy kind of way. If you respond with anger, They read it as danger. If you disappear completely, they see it as validation of their fears. If you push too hard, they feel smothered. But if you stay calm, grounded, and steady, giving space without disappearing, you pass a test you didn't even know you were taking. What complicates this dynamic is that avoidants often hate the very silence they create. They miss you during it, think about you constantly, and hope you don't take it personally. But staying quiet feels safer than exposing their need for you. They're not trying to make you prove yourself. They're trying to confirm whether the connection is safe enough for them to open up. To you, it feels like withdrawal. To them, it's protection. To you, it feels like uncertainty. To them, it's survival. And when their silence ends, when they come back, even subtly, it's often because your loyalty passed the quiet test they never asked you to take out loud. When they're scared of losing you, they'll match your tone, pace, and effort just so they don't risk overinvesting first. When an avoidant begins to care more than they ever intended, something subtle but powerful happens. They stop leading the emotional dynamic and start mirroring it. Not because they lack interest and not because they're unsure, but because they're terrified of showing more than you do. Avoidants grow up believing that emotional investment is dangerous, that caring too much gives someone the power to hurt them. So when feelings deepen, their instinct isn't to move closer, it's to camouflage their vulnerability by matching whatever energy you show. If you're warm and expressive, they soften too. If you're slow and careful, they become slow and careful. If you seem unsure, they suddenly seem even more unsure. And if you pull back, they don't chase, they retreat further, convinced your withdrawal means they were foolish to open up at all. What looks like emotional neutrality is actually strategic safety. They measure your tone, your pace, and your effort like tiny emotional indicators, adjusting themselves at every step to avoid misreading the situation. This mirroring isn't manipulation. It's their fear wearing a polite face. Avoidants dread the idea of being too much for someone. They fear expressing more affection than you feel. They fear being dependent on someone who may not be fully invested. And the moment they sense their feelings surpass yours, panic rises. To calm that panic, they take the back seat, blending into your pace, so they never risk stepping ahead emotionally. They think, if I move exactly like they do, I can't get hurt. It's their version of safety, moving in sync instead of leading with their heart. You'll notice this mirroring most when the connection gets intense. If you text less, their texts shrink too. If you sound distant, they go quiet. If you act busy, they suddenly become busier. They don't want to overwhelm you, pressure you, or risk coming across as needy. They want to make sure your interest matches theirs before they reveal anything more. The irony is that this mirroring can make them look detached when in reality, they're trying not to scare you away. And here's the hidden truth. The more they mirror you, the more they care. People who don't matter to them don't get this careful calibration. They don't watch their words. They don't measure their tone. They don't track patterns. They don't mirror. They only do this with the person who emotionally threatens their walls, the one who could actually matter. But this behavior can create misunderstandings. You interpret their matching energy as lack of effort. They interpret your withdrawal as a warning to protect themselves. Both of you retreat, thinking the other is pulling away, when in reality, the avoidant is simply following your lead to avoid stepping too far ahead. What they really want is reassurance, quiet, steady, consistent reassurance that it's safe to invest. But they won't ask for it. They wait for the emotional atmosphere to feel stable enough to show their full feelings. In their heart, the mirroring isn't about staying distant. It's about staying safe until they're convinced you won't punish them for caring too much. And when they finally feel grounded, when your consistency outweighs their fear, that's when they stop mirroring and start connecting with their real, unmasked self. Avoidants will pretend they don't care while secretly tracking every move you make. One of the most deceptive behaviors an avoidant displays when they're deeply attached is their ability to look completely unbothered while internally monitoring everything. On the surface, they appear calm, indifferent, even distant. They act like your choices don't affect them, like your absence doesn't sting, like your shifts in tone or timing mean nothing. But behind that cool detachment is someone paying incredibly close attention, someone who is far more emotionally invested than they want anyone, including themselves, to realize. This isn't a game. It's a deeply ingrained survival strategy. Caring openly feels risky to an avoidant. Showing emotion feels unsafe. So instead, they slip into a role that feels familiar, the quiet observer. They watch without reacting. They notice without commenting. They feel without expressing. And while you're wondering whether they've lost interest, they're analyzing every small shift in your energy. They pick up on how long you take to reply, whether your tone is softer or colder, whether you're posting more, engaging less, or suddenly interacting with someone new. They may not say it, but trust me, they see it. In their mind, gathering information quietly is safer than asking directly. Asking would expose vulnerability. Asking would reveal dependence. Asking would show that you matter. And for an avoidant, admitting how much they care can feel like stepping into emotional danger. So they hide behind a mask of composure while scanning for signs of emotional threat or abandonment. If you start pulling away, they feel it. If you grow distant, they sense it instantly. If someone else gets too close to you, jealousy sparks. Quietly, intensely, silently. What's most misunderstood is that their detachment isn't apathy, it's protection. Their acting unbothered is a shield against the possibility of caring more than the other person. Inside, they care deeply, so deeply that it scares them. So they train themselves to look neutral even when their internal world is anything but. And this creates a painful paradox. They want to be seen, but they don't want to reveal themselves. They want reassurance, but they refuse to ask for it. They want closeness, but they fear what that closeness demands. You'll notice this behavior most when the connection becomes meaningful. They don't track details with people who mean little to them. They don't analyze patterns with someone they're indifferent to. They don't observe or overthink unless the bond matters. Their attention is the giveaway, even if their words never are. They may sit silently, giving you space, but internally they're replaying conversations, decoding your reactions, and trying to interpret what your behavior says about your feeling. If you confront them about caring, they'll deny it, partly out of pride, partly out of fear. But their eyes tell the truth long before their words ever will. Avoidance, care in silence, love in shadows, and protect themselves. By pretending, they feel nothing at all. The truth is, they notice everything because losing you would hurt more than they're willing to admit. And pretending not to care is the only defense they know against the intensity of emotions they can't switch off. When emotions hit too hard, the avoidant's first move is distance, not because they're leaving you, but because they're losing control. When an avoidant starts to feel real emotional intensity, their internal world goes into overdrive. What feels like closeness and connection to you feels like danger and overwhelm to them. They're not used to letting someone in, not used to feeling that magnetic pull, not used to caring to the point where their independence feels threatened. So the moment the emotions become too strong, the moment they catch themselves thinking about you more often, craving your presence or imagining what deeper commitment might look like, their instinctive reaction is to create distance. This distance isn't rejection, it's regulation. To them, pulling back is a reset button. It's the only way they know to calm the emotional storm rising inside. They're not trying to hurt you or punish you. They're trying to protect themselves from feeling consumed by something they've spent most of their life trying to avoid emotional dependency. When they step back, it's because the closeness feels so powerful that they fear losing themselves in it. They fear being vulnerable. They fear relying on you. And most of all, they fear the possibility of losing something or someone they've secretly begun to treasure. The avoidant distance isn't meant to end the connection, it's meant to control the intensity of it. They need space to breathe, think, process, and reestablish their emotional balance. Without that space, they feel like the relationship is happening to them rather than something they can slowly ease into. Distance gives them a sense of control over their own feelings. Control they lost the moment they started falling for you in ways they didn't expect. During this withdrawal, they often replay everything in their mind. They think about how close things were getting, how much the connection was deepening, and whether they're capable of handling that kind of vulnerability. They simultaneously miss you and fear the intensity of missing you. Why they want to reach out, but they don't want to appear too invested. They care, but the caring itself feels overwhelming, and so they retreat into silence, distraction, or emotional coolness, not to disappear, but to stabilize. The painful part is how misunderstood this phase becomes. To you, it might feel like abandonment. To them, it's survival. To you, it looks like loss of interest. To them, it's regaining emotional grounding. To you, it feels like a step back. To them, it's preparation for moving forward without panic. They're not shutting the door, they're trying to keep it from swinging open too fast. What's important to understand is that avoidants rarely distance themselves from people they don't care about. If the connection meant nothing, they wouldn't need space to process it. Distance is a sign of emotional overwhelm, not emotional emptiness. They take space because they're feeling too much, not too little. And when they finally return, softer, calmer, more grounded, it's because the distance did what it was meant to do. It helped them regain control. It helped them breathe. It helped them come back in a way that feels safe for them. The return is never loud. It's quiet, subtle, tentative, but it's real. Because once they feel back in charge of their emotional world, they're ready to move closer again, even if only one small step at a time. Avoidants reveal their feelings in doses, never too much, never too little. Avoidants have a unique way of expressing affection, one that can leave you both hopeful and confused at the same time. When they care deeply, they don't pour their heart out or make grand emotional gestures. Instead, they offer small, carefully measured pieces of themselves, just enough to keep the connection alive, but never enough to make them feel exposed. This isn't manipulation or mind games, it's emotional survival. They've learned to ration vulnerability the way others ration oxygen. Too much feels suffocating, too little feels lonely. So they balance it in tiny, intentional doses. These moments come in subtle ways: a thoughtful text, an unexpected compliment, a rare moment of softness in their voice. You'll get glimpses of their real emotions, small windows into how deeply they feel, but as soon as the closeness intensifies, they retreat just a bit. It's their internal warning system kicking in. Careful, this is getting too real. They open up, then they lock the door again. They show affection, then they quiet down. They let you see their heart, then they pull the curtain back into place. To the person on the receiving end, this can feel confusing. One moment you feel chosen, seen, important, and the next you're wondering if you imagined the connection entirely. But for the avoidant, these small offerings are monumental. Every shared thought, every vulnerable sentence, every moment they let you closer is a huge emotional risk. They're not giving you just enough to keep you hanging on. They're giving you the maximum their fear allows. This behavior often comes from past pain, relationships, or childhood experiences where vulnerability resulted in disappointment or rejection. They learn that opening up fully leads to hurt, so they give affection carefully and intentionally. Their logic becomes, if I reveal myself slowly, I can control the pace of the connection. I can control how much I can lose. And so they offer affection in doses, a gentle message when they miss you, a subtle check-in when they're thinking about you, a quiet reassurance when they see your distance shift. What makes this especially confusing is how genuine these small moments are. Avoidants don't fake softness. They don't pretend emotional honesty. When they show something real, it is real. It's simply brief because lingering in it feels dangerous. They want to connect, but they don't want to drown in vulnerability. They want intimacy, but not at the cost of their emotional security. Ironically, the more they care about you, the more carefully they manage these moments. With people they don't care for, they feel no need to measure anything. But with someone who matters, someone who triggers their deepest fears and deepest desires, they tread softly. They give just enough to show the connection is there, enough to keep the bond alive, enough to keep hope burning, but never so much that it threatens their sense of control. Over time, these micro moments build a quiet love language, subtle, soft, cautious, but deeply sincere. And as the connection deepens and trust grows, those just enough moments slowly expand into something fuller, steadier, and unmistakably real. If they seem irritated but won't say why, it's usually jealousy they're too proud to confess. One of the clearest signs an avoidant is more emotionally invested than they let on is how they react to even the smallest hint of competition. But unlike others, they don't express jealousy in obvious ways. They won't say they're worried. They won't ask questions. They won't confront you. Instead, their jealousy slips out through subtle shifts, irritation in their tone, unexpected distance, sharper responses, or an odd change in the way they interact with you. They'll act like your interactions with others mean nothing, but inside it triggers a storm they refuse to acknowledge. Avoidants don't get jealous because they're controlling. They get jealous because caring feels foreign and vulnerable. Jealousy exposes how deeply they feel, and that terrifies them. Even the idea of saying, "that bothered me," feels like admitting emotional dependence, and dependence is something avoidants have spent their entire lives avoiding. So instead of saying anything, they swallow the feeling and try to disguise it, but it leaks out in small, telling ways. You might notice they suddenly become quieter when you mention someone else, or they respond with a dry joke, a sarcastic comment, or a dismissive tone. They may pull back slightly, not because they want to punish you, but because they're trying to protect themselves from the intensity of what they're feeling. They need a moment to retreat, recalibrate, to soothe the spike of insecurity that jealousy brings. And during that time, they'll act like nothing is wrong, even though something very much is. Their jealousy is never wild or dramatic. It's subtle, almost invisible, unless you know what to look for. A slight delay in their usual response, a sudden shift in energy, a quieter demeanor, a guarded edge to their words. They're trying to remain composed, to act unaffected, to maintain the emotional upper hand they feel slipping. But deep down, your closeness with someone else sends a hit to their chest they'll never admit they felt. The irony is that jealousy for an avoidant is one of the strongest signs of attachment. They don't get jealous over people they don't care about. They don't overthink interactions that mean nothing to them. They only feel threatened when someone has access to a part of you. They want to be theirs, but are too afraid to claim. Jealousy exposes their fears. Fear of being replaced, fear of not being enough, fear of losing someone they quietly adore. But because they won't express it directly, their jealousy becomes a quiet internal battle. They try to convince themselves it doesn't matter. They try to remain neutral. They try to detach emotionally. But the ache stays. And the more they care, the harder it becomes for them to hide it. Their silence speaks. Their withdrawal speaks. Their sudden hyper-awareness speaks louder than anything they'll ever say. If you pay close attention, you'll notice that avoidant jealousy is not about control. It's about fear. Not fear of you choosing someone else, but fear of admitting they want you enough for it to hurt. It's their pride wrestling with their heart, their walls fighting their desires. And even though they'll never confess it out loud, that flicker of jealousy is one of the strongest signs that you matter more than they ever intended. Avoidants don't say, "I need you." They show it in the most understated ways. When an avoidant is attached, their love doesn't come in the form of long emotional confessions or dramatic declarations. Instead, it shows up in quiet, practical acts, subtle gestures so gentle and understated that most people overlook lemon. Avoidants are uncomfortable with vulnerability, uncomfortable with emotional exposure, and deeply uncomfortable with anything that might reveal how much they care. So they express affection in ways that feel safer, less revealing, and more controlled through actions, not words. If you pay attention, you'll see that avoidants give care through small, thoughtful behaviors. They'll fix something for you without being asked. They'll check in on your day in a low-key, non-intrusive way. They'll offer help when you're stressed, or do something small that makes your life easier. They might bring you something they noticed you needed, or remember details you mentioned briefly. These gestures seem casual, but they're full of meaning. They're the avoidance way of saying, "you matter more than I'm comfortable admitting." They don't express warmth through emotional closeness. They express it through usefulness. They want to be helpful, dependable, supportive, not because they're trying to perform or impress you, but because doing practical things feels like a safe way to show love without exposing their heart. For them, actions feel less risky than words. Words can be misinterpreted, rejected, or held against them. But a quiet gesture, that feels steady, controllable, and unthreatening. This is why avoidants often get misunderstood. Their emotional suppression can make them look detached when they're actually deeply invested. They won't say, I'm worried about you, but they'll show up when you need help. They won't say, I miss you, but they'll find a reason to reach out. They won't say, I care, but they'll do something thoughtful that took real attention. These practical acts are their emotional breadcrumbs, subtle, scattered signs of affection left behind without drawing attention to themselves. And here's where the inner conflict kicks in. They want to express more, but vulnerability terrifies them. They want to be emotionally open, but their internal alarm system warns against it. So they channel those feelings into something they can control, a small task, a gentle favor, a quiet act of support. To them, these gestures are enormous steps they take only with someone who matters deeply. Ironically, they often hope you'll notice these gestures without needing to discuss them. It's their way of saying, I'm showing you what I can't say out loud. They hope their actions speak for them. They hope you'll understand the emotion behind their understated help. They hope you'll see the heart they're trying so hard to keep protected. And the more attached they are, the more frequent these practical signs become. They won't shower you with emotional language, but they'll consistently show up in small ways. They'll quietly support you. They'll fix. They'll help. They'll make things easier without drawing attention to it. Because this is the only version of intimacy that feels safe enough for them to give, at least until trust grows deep enough for them to let down the walls. Avoidants run hardest from the people they want the most. One of the most paradoxical and painful behaviors of an avoidant is their tendency to withdraw just as a connection deepens. The closer you get, the more emotionally available you become, and the more vulnerable you make them feel. And this triggers the avoidance instinct to pull back. It's not about losing interest or a lack of feelings. It's about fear. Fear of being consumed, fear of dependence, fear of losing themselves in a bond they can't fully control. The intensity of closeness feels like a threat, and their natural response is to step away. This behavior often feels abrupt. One moment they're engaged, affectionate and present. The next, there's a distance, subtle or pronounced, that leaves you questioning everything. You might wonder if you did something wrong or if they've changed their mind. But for the avoidant, it's rarely about you at all. It's about managing their own inner chaos, protecting themselves from an emotional wave they're not yet ready to ride. Pulling away is their way of hitting pause, of regaining emotional equilibrium before the feelings become overwhelming. The irony is that the more they care, the more pronounced this pattern becomes. If you're emotionally unimportant to them, they don't feel the need to withdraw. They remain indifferent. But if you matter, if you've reached the part of their heart they rarely allow anyone to touch, the intensity becomes a trigger. They're wired to fear that closeness will overwhelm, and the very bond they desire becomes the bond they fear most. It's a push-pull in its rawest form. They run from what they want because their attachment makes them anxious. During these withdrawals, they often observe quietly from a distance. They monitor your reactions, replay interactions in their mind, and assess whether it's safe to return. They may reach out minimally, test the waters with a small message, or subtly engage to see if the bond is intact. So this isn't manipulation, it's cautious navigation. They're weighing the risks of emotional exposure against the desire to stay connected. For those on the receiving end, this pattern can feel like heartbreak, confusion, or rejection, but it's not meant to punish, it's self-preservation. Avoidants aren't emotionally absent because they don't care. They're emotionally overwhelmed because they care too much. Their withdrawal is the signal of intense attachment disguised as avoidance, a paradoxical behavior that both hides and highlights how deeply they feel. And the truth is, if you give them space without chasing, remain consistent, and create a calm emotional environment, they often return, slowly, cautiously, tentatively. Their pullback isn't permanent, it's a protective measure that allows them to process closeness safely. In essence, their running is proof of attachment. They pull away only from those who matter, from those they fear losing, and from those whose presence touches parts of them they struggle to expose. If they reappear with small messages or subtle gestures, it means they never left emotionally. Avoidants don't return in grand, dramatic ways. They rarely announce their feelings with declarations or intense apologies. When they care, their reappearance is quiet, understated, and often tentative. A simple text, a meme that made them think of you, a casual question about your day. These small gestures carry more weight than words ever could. They signal presence without vulnerability, affection without exposure, and desire without pressure. It's their way of testing the waters, ensuring it's safe before fully stepping back into the emotional space they once retreated from. The subtlety of their return is a direct reflection of the fear that drove them away in the first place. They worry that if they overstep, if they come back too strongly, they'll scare you off or reveal just how much they care. And the truth is, coming back softly isn't a lack of feelings, it's the opposite. It's the avoidance way of saying, I've never stopped thinking about you, even when it felt too much to be near you. Their return is careful, measured, and deliberate. Every interaction is a quiet negotiation between their desire for connection and their fear of vulnerability. During these soft returns, they often observe more than they communicate. They gauge your energy, measure your receptivity, and try to assess whether it's truly safe to be close again. They may not say, I missed you outright, but every small action, checking in, sharing something personal, showing subtle concern, is a breadcrumb of genuine attachment. They're speaking through behavior rather than words, crafting a pathway back that feels secure for them, and ultimately for the relationship. What makes this behavior so significant is that avoidance rarely, if ever, return to people they don't care about. If the connection meant nothing, there would be no soft gestures, no quiet checking in, no subtle presence. Their cautious return is a declaration of care disguised as nonchalance. They're saying without saying it that you matter more than they ever intended to admit. It's also a reflection of growth and self-regulation. The act of coming back softly shows that they've processed some of the fear that pushed them away. They've found ways to engage without feeling overwhelmed. They've learned to navigate closeness without losing themselves entirely. And though their approach is understated, it carries a weight of sincerity that loud words could never match. For anyone on the receiving end, it can feel like a gentle invitation, a whisper that says, I'm here. I've thought of you. I want to reconnect carefully, cautiously, but genuinely. And if you respond with patience, steadiness, and understanding, the soft return can blossom into the deep, slow, and real connection that avoidants are capable of. One that's built on trust, emotional safety, and the subtle but undeniable proof that love doesn't always need to shout to be true.